Hello, I'm Hala Mohideen, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your look at the world of business and economics. This week, from mishandling the pandemic to its over-reliance on commodities, the outsiders challenging the political establishment in Latin America as millions fall back into poverty in the most unequal region of the world. Argentina avoids another default with falling currency reserves. The country could mine its way out of trouble. With huge reserves of lithium, Buenos Aires wants more from international miners who ship its minerals overseas. And late to e-commerce, the Middle East is playing catch-up. We talk to one of the biggest investors and ask, can the region deliver another success like ride-hailing app Careem? Latin America's fortunes have been inextricably linked to commodity prices. As copper, gold, oil and soy prices rise, so do political fortunes. Foreign money floods into the region and everyone feels richer. But inevitably, for commodity producers, the curse of rising currencies makes it more expensive to import, leading to inflation, hot money leaves and debts soar. And people fall back into poverty. And the cycle goes on. Right now, the pandemic is hitting the region harder than any other. According to the UN Economic Commission on Latin America and the Caribbean, just over a third of the region's population, or 209 million people, are living in poverty. That's 22 million more than last year. With slightly more than 8% of the world's population, or 600 million people, it has almost 28% of all the deaths from COVID-19. Now, the economy contracted almost 8% last year. That's despite governments spending $86 billion attempting to support the economy. Well, many incumbent governments are under pressure for their poor handling of the pandemic, and it's mainly parties on the left that are taking advantage. 13 countries are holding elections in the next 15 months or so. Peru has already elected primary school teacher and trade union activist Pedro Castillo as its next president. His campaign asked a simple question: why is the resource-rich nation so poor? He unseated conservative rival Keiko Fujimori. Now, in Chile, a communist, Daniel Jadue, is likely to unseat the right-of-centre Sebastián Piñera in November's presidential elections. In an interview with Bloomberg, he said people are coming to the realisation that neoliberal policies are incompatible with democracy. Chileans have had enough of the free market that has failed to reduce inequalities. And in Colombia, left-wing candidate Gustavo Petro could become the country's first socialist leader. And Lula da Silva could make a comeback in Brazil against right-wing populist Jair Bolsonaro, who belittled the pandemic as almost 500,000 citizens perished. A patchwork of lockdowns have done little to contain the pandemic. With costs rising, governments are keen to get people vaccinated and find new sources of income to pay for the pandemic. Well, Argentina is one country that has huge potential to become one of the world's leading lithium producers. It's a major challenge for this South American nation that's seeking international partners to help develop the industry. Teresa Bo has more.
Lithium extraction is well underway at the Olaro salt flats in the province of Jujuy in northern Argentina. It is referred to as the wild gold of renewable energy. Gabriel Marquez says Argentina needs to increase lithium extraction, but also manufacture batteries to add value to the production chain.
We are trying to establish a small supply chain of lithium batteries so we can meet with demand. One area of demand is the transformation of Argentina's large public transport system to include electric buses.
Lithium production is a priority for Argentina's government. Its Minister of Production says the government has already signed deals with several companies. China is a major player in the business and has been increasing its presence in the region.
We are seeing lots of interest in the possibility of investing in the country. Last week, we signed a memorandum with a Chinese company that is already producing lithium in Argentina and is hoping to advance into batteries. And we signed with another Chinese company to build batteries in cars. We are seeing lots of interest because of our natural resources, industrial history and technology that allows us to plan ahead.
Lithium-ion batteries, rechargeable and lightweight, power the most used electronic devices on the planet, from cell phones to laptops. Much of that lithium comes from what is known as the lithium triangle.
Argentina, Bolivia and Chile have around 70% of the world's lithium reserves. The lithium is in liquid brine reserves located in salt flats like this one. Thousands of liters of water are necessary to pump up the brine reserves to the surface. They're later on distributed in evaporation pools. Communities around this area are concerned that lithium extraction could complicate their access to water.
People here depend on these salt flats to make a living. And Clemente Flores is part of the indigenous communities in the area.
Our ancestors have been living here since before the Argentine state, and now they want to invade it. We haven't seen any serious studies on what will happen to the water. It is something that worries us. We are concerned about what is being done to other salt flats in the region. They are broken, dirty, and we don't want that to happen here.
And that's why scientists like Victoria Flexer are working to find alternative ways to extract lithium.
So we are looking at both disruptive technologies, that means technologies that do not need to evaporate water to extract lithium, and we are also looking at what we might call upgrades to the current evaporative technology. And we are looking to try to recover some of the water that is currently lost during evaporation. It would be an inconsistency to extract lithium for a greener world and for a greener economy if we are contaminating the regions or the locations around the deposits.
Developing technologies is expensive and will take time. A major challenge for developing nations who are trying to find a balance between conservation and growth. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Jujuy, Argentina.
Well, let's get some analysis now with Jimena Blanco. She's the head of America's Risk Insights at Verisk Maplecroft. And Jimena joins us now by Skype from Buenos Aires. Good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. Now, as much as it's dangerous to lump together a region of 600 million people or a dozen or so countries, it does appear that there is momentum with all the candidates on the left. Why is this? Do you think this is all to do with the pandemic?
Well, I think the pandemic has actually exacerbated some of the underlying challenges that the region has faced for many decades, right? And, I'd like to challenge a bit this idea that the region is turning to the left. I think what we're seeing in Latin America is a challenge to incumbents and establishments, which, we could say we're seeing more broadly across the world. In the region, really, this is injecting additional instability because it's fragmenting political systems that were, from their inception, intended to be representing you have a few number of parties, right? And now what we're ending up with is congresses with a high number of parties and presidents that are acting in a way like they're in a parliamentary system, needing to get the support from all these political parties to rule. But at the same time, it's not a parliamentary system. So Congresses cannot remove the president except in exceptional circumstances. And unfortunately, we have seen that happening in the region increasingly over the past decade.
Well, would you say that this current rise in commodity prices then is coming a bit too late to save these incumbent governments in the region?
Yes, because the problem is not only economic, right? I mean, of course, the economy plays a huge role, and the pandemic hit the region very hard. Latin America recorded the second worst GDP contraction as a region. FDI has dropped massively in all the major economies, right? Whether you're talking about Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, they've all seen major drops in FDI in 2020. But there's also much more structural underlying social issues in the region that governments both on the left and on the right have failed to address for many years. And so voters in the region are looking for those new candidates that break with traditional parties, promise a break with traditional politics, and promise to make those long-lasting changes to address inequality, poverty, informality, unemployment, access to education, access to healthcare. So really, it's much more complex than is the economy doing well or is the economy doing poorly at the moment?
Well, specifically, if we look at the case of Peru, Pedro Castillo, he could be the next president there. Is he right to question why such a resource-rich nation is so poor?
Well, absolutely. Peru has some significant structural issues to address. I mean, speaking about the pandemic, with 70% informality, we saw Peru lose gains that it had taken it a decade to make in just 1 year, whether we're talking about employment or poverty rates, right? And in education, the system remains shut down. So we're talking about generations where human capital development is going to lag behind for several years. And as you mentioned, this is one of the most economically successful countries in the region in recent years, and very wealthy when it comes to its mineral wealth and especially copper. So, of course, from a political perspective, Castillo's promises to review the contribution that mining makes to the economy and how that is spent and how that helps development resonates with voters, particularly those in the rural areas, where communities see their environment affected by extractive industries, but they feel Lima takes all the wealth and doesn't distribute it back to the regions that are hosting multinationals extracting minerals.
Well, let's head to Chile now. I mean, the country's now rewriting its dictatorship-era constitution. Are right-wing free markets or neoliberalist policies on the back foot over there? How do you see events there playing out?
Well, I see Chile as a very different story because, of course, of the institutional development that the country has. So even though it faces similar challenges, right, the issues I mentioned before, I could make that same statement about Chile in terms of education and access to healthcare, et cetera. But I think that the huge difference in Chile, if we compare it to the case of Peru or even the case of Colombia, which is in the midst of significant civil unrest at the moment and has been for the almost 3 months, the difference is the Chilean political establishment was able to rally together rather early on in the civil unrest movement, right after 2 months in 2019, and institute a framework and a road to resolve that in a structural manner and in an institutional manner. Now, the question is, will it be successful and will it be enough to placate social demands? Because, of course, any structural response, right, when we're rewriting a constitution, creating effectively a new legal framework for the country, this takes a lot of time. So the question then becomes, are Chileans patient enough to see those changes through, which are going to take anywhere between 5 to 10 years at least to show any results? In the meantime, what we're seeing is very short-term demands for more money making it into people's pockets. And we have seen that throughout the pandemic, with the government having to give into changing the pension system and allowing for pension withdrawals early on, as people want to see the money that they've been saving for many years and decades back in their pockets.
Jimena Blanco from Verisk Maplecroft, thanks so much for talking us through the complex dynamics in this fascinating region. We appreciate it. Now, skyrocketing fuel prices in India are driving up the cost of food and other basic goods. It's putting pressure on millions of families and comes as the inflation rate surpasses the crucial 6% threshold set by the country's central bank. Elizabeth Puranam has more now from New Delhi.
12-year-old Shoba cooks flatbread for her family on a fire made of wood and dried cow dung. Her mother, Soni, earns just over $3 a day when she gets work in the vegetable farms that surround their home. But she says they can't afford to buy gas for cooking.
It's really hard right now to take care of my family. Prices are going up. Lentils are $1.30 a kilo, so who's going to eat that? We don't buy anything to eat. We only eat the vegetables which grow in the fields and don't buy anything else because of the rising prices.
The price of essential items has been increasing in India during the past year. Cooking oil by 30%, fruits and vegetables by 12% and lentils by 10%. And that has had a big impact in a country where the average income is the equivalent of about $5 a day. One reason for the higher price of food is the cost of transportation.
Fruits are not for the poor because their prices are skyrocketing. And even vegetables, people buy half a kilo instead of one. Sales are low while expenses are high. Meanwhile, the fuel prices have already broken the backs of the poor.
The government has increased fuel prices up to 50 times this year, leading to protests earlier this month. On average, an Indian spends nearly a fifth of their daily wages on fuel. India's inflation rate, which reflects an increase in the price of goods and services, was 6.3% in May. That is above the 6% threshold set by the Reserve Bank of India. Economists say the rise in the price of food is more worrying than that of fuel.
This trend of food prices going up is going to get much worse, in which case it's going to have a devastating effect on the urban poor in particular, and some of the rural poor, particularly those who are in non-agricultural activities and who actually buy their food rather than get them in kind.
The government distributes free rations to the poor, but the help doesn't reach everyone. Soni says she doesn't have the ration card that's necessary to get the food. Her children, including 9-year-old Gautam, are only attending classes because of the kindness of a few young people who are teaching for free. Soni wants Shoba to learn to cook and clean in case her free education stops, and she'll have to find work. Elizabeth Puranam, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Now, the Middle East has always loved bricks and mortar shopping, mostly because of family-owned conglomerates controlled by the old guard. But a younger generation has been pushing the boundaries of e-commerce with huge success, with ride-hailing app Careem being snapped up by Uber and souq.com falling to Amazon. The pandemic has accelerated the shift online for shoppers and foodies alike. One company that has managed to raise $24 million from the likes of Saudi Jordanian investment fund is opensooq. The Amman-based mobile-first classified marketplace claims to have 65 million consumers across the region and sells goods worth around $30 billion a year. So let's talk now with Khaldoon Tabaza, the founder and managing director of investment group iMENA Group. He's also chairman of opensooq. Great to talk to you today. Now, you own many of the Middle East's top e-commerce sites. I'm talking, of course, about opensooq, sellanycar.com, and the ride-hailing service Jeeny. Have you seen any more traffic, as it were, during the pandemic?
Thank you for having me, Hala. Obviously, the pandemic has been a great accelerant for adoption and usage of e-commerce services, in a similar manner to how mobile penetration increased penetration. The pandemic has been the driver for more usage and adoption. In a business like opensooq, users have turned to our application to search and find whatever they need, be it a car or an apartment, fashion, anything that they need. This has facilitated their lives tremendously. We have gotten to about 2.8 billion page views in opensooq last year, which was a record year for us during the pandemic. At this point of time, every 13 seconds, so probably since we started, there have been 2 items that were already sold on opensooq. What we have seen also is that after the lockdowns were partially and fully lifted in many of the countries, that this increase and surge in traffic to e-commerce businesses in the MENA region has persisted and continued to increase, in fact. So we're very optimistic about the future of e-commerce and online services in the MENA region.
Well, there's lots to be optimistic about. I mean, your firms have shown remarkable adaptability to challenging circumstances. But for the ride-sharing app Jeeny, I mean, was that not hit at all by the pandemic? Because we know Uber and Lyft really struggled during those tough times.
Of course. So obviously, when there were lockdowns and people were unable to move, Jeeny was significantly affected. However, when lockdowns were lifted partially, we noted that Jeeny has gotten back to its previous levels and exceeded its previous levels of traffic. More importantly, after the lockdowns were lifted, we've seen Jeeny basically hitting new levels and new records in terms of traffic. This is because users and passengers have opted for private cars, because private cars offer them assurance in terms of basically security, in terms of health. Those cars are disinfected today because we have influence over our drivers. By the end of this month, we're going to have 100% of all of Jeeny's drivers being vaccinated, which is something that is very hard or difficult to say or claim for other, public transportation services.
Well, that's great that the businesses have proved so adaptable and able to cope with the challenges. Would you say there are any more unicorns in the Middle East that we should be keeping an eye on at this time? Because Careem, of course, was bought for more than $3 billion by Uber. And the scene has really inspired a lot more investment as investors are looking for the next big thing.
Oh, absolutely. What's happening in the Middle East, Hala, is that there is transfer of value that is happening in the large traditional economy sectors. So take, for example, a business like opensooq. Where did all of those ads that used to appear in 64-page printed newspapers in the Middle East go? Any ad that is related to a service, whether you're selling a car or renting an apartment or looking for somebody to hire or offering any kind of service, all of those ads has shifted to opensooq. So all of those, billion-dollar valuations have shifted to online businesses, with the like of opensooq leading the way. Not even that, but those businesses are getting closer to the transaction. So though they started by, selling advertising space, they're now making a cut on the transaction itself, which means that they're even going to be bigger than, their basically parallel business models in the traditional economy. The same is happening, for example, in the automotive sector, car trading sectors, etc. The way you have seen many billionaires being minted in the Middle East because, they were car traders owning the largest showrooms in the most prestigious, streets in Dubai or Doha or, Jeddah or Riyadh. This is now, moving online, where businesses like sellanycar have become the largest used car trader in the UAE in no time, becoming bigger than any of the existing car traders.
Well, given this changing dynamic, do you think there's a need for a tech index in the Middle East like the NASDAQ to spur growth?
Most definitely. I mean, until today, there is no proxy for the growth of online businesses in the MENA region that is listed, that investors can buy into to sort of participate in the growth of online businesses in the MENA region. And there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that, there hasn't been big enough businesses to list, and the ones who have become big, like Careem and Souq, were snapped. But I think, we're seeing those big businesses coming through, and we're seeing businesses like, honestly, our own business model as iMENA Group, where we're considering a listing of the group itself to provide access for ultra-high net worth individuals and family offices to be able to invest and participate in the growth of online businesses in the MENA region. I believe we are approximately 15 years behind the US probably 10 years behind Western Europe, and maybe 5 to 7 years behind Southeast Asia. So there is a lot to come.
There's a lot to come, a lot of catching up to do, but a fascinatingly diverse and changing landscape. Great to get your thoughts on this. Khaldoon Tabaza, the Managing Director of the iMENA Group, thank you so much for talking to us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you for having me, Hala.
And that is our show for this week. But there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That will take you straight to our page, which has entire episodes for you to catch up on. I'm Hala Mahideen from the whole Counting the Cost team. Thank you for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.